Hello and welcome to this NET Back to Basics video focusing today on AQA Literature Paper 1 Section A. Now, the idea in all of these videos is we'll be talking through a simple summary version of the key points and doing it as quickly as we can. And today we're going to focus on Romeo and Juliet as a play and as characters and how we approach the question. Let's run through some basics. So, Literature Paper 1. Now, the paper lasts an hour and 45 minutes, and that's about 2 hours 10 minutes if you have that 25% extra time. Now, the paper's split into two halves. The first half is on the Shakespeare text that you studied. The second is on the 19th century novel that you studied. Now, for many students watching this, that means it will be Romeo and Juliet, and that's followed then by A Christmas Carol or Jekyll and Hyde. Now, simplifying a bit, section A is worth 34 marks because it includes those 4 marks for SPAG, and I'm aware simplifying that slightly. Section B is worth 30 marks. Now, for that reason, it's worth spending about 55 minutes on your Shakespeare response and about 50 minutes on your 19th century novel response. If it helps, simplifying it even further, basically you want to split the exam into halves. For the Shakespeare question, there's going to be a whole range of questions on a whole range of different plays. Now, you want to be very careful to be finding the one that is on Romeo and Juliet, and that should be around page 6. Now, there's only one question on the text, so there's no choice on this one, I'm afraid. Now, at the top of the extract, you're always given enough information that you know where the extract is from and what's happening. At the bottom of the extract, you're then given the question. Now, the question always says something along the lines of starting with. Now, that's a reminder to talk about the extract on the page, but also the whole text. You're then asked about how the writer presents something. Now, that could be a character. It could be a combination of characters. It could be a theme. It could be an idea. It could even, in theory, be a setting, although that's really, really unusual. Now, as a quick note, whether the question is on a theme or a character is nothing to worry about. A question about a character also links to themes, and a question about a theme also has to link to characters. So basically, a character question is also a theme question, and a theme question is also a character question, so there's no need to be scared of either of them. You're given bullet points, which essentially just remind you to talk about the extract and the whole text, and then the marks. Now, leaving aside that 4 marks for SPAG, there are 30 marks for this question in terms of the content and the way you write. And you're marked on, first of all, your ideas about the task and your ideas about the extract and how you explain them. You're marked on your choice of quotations and how you use them. You're marked on how you talk about the writer's choices, so the techniques, the features that they use, and the effect that they have. And you're also marked on how you discuss the big ideas in the text and how you talk about the context. Now, as I've said, there are also marks for your technical accuracy, so you need to make sure you're being careful with things like capital letters and punctuation. In terms of the essay that you write, you're probably going to manage somewhere in the region of 4 to 6 paragraphs in total, and that's about average for someone at this stage. And what that means is that you're going to be taking, ideally, about 2 to 3 points from the extract and 2 to 3 from the rest of the text. Now, good advice is to basically follow the story from the start to the end. It's not the only way of doing it, but it's a way that does work. So the extract's from the start, then start with the extract, then talk about the middle of the text, and then talk about the end of the text. If the extract's from the middle of the text, then talk about the start of the text, then do the extract, and then talk about the end of the text. And if it's from the end of the text, then talk about the start of the text, talk about the middle of the text, and then do the extract. If it's that last option with the extracts from the end, it's worth throwing in a few references earlier on, just to make sure you're covered. Now, in terms of the extract, you tend to find that it's been chosen to start somewhere significant, and also to end somewhere important. So what that means is you're probably going to find really early on in the extract, possibly even the first line, some sort of useful quotation. And then at the end of the extract, it's also going to stop somewhere significant, so the last few lines will give you something important as well. So what can we prepare in advance? Well, we can't know in advance what extract you're going to be given. We don't know which character it'll be on. We don't know what theme it might ask about. However, it's about the play Romeo and Juliet, and that means that every question, fundamentally, comes down to being a question about Romeo and Juliet. Now, if the question is about a character who isn't Romeo or Juliet, then there'll definitely be someone linked to one or both of them, because they're the centre of the play. So they'll be compared to one of them or to both of them. They'll be contrasted with one of them or both of them. So what that means is that Romeo and Juliet are always safe to talk about. That also means that there are certain themes you'll probably be able to talk about because they're the big hitting themes that are to do with those two main characters, those two protagonists. So things like love, relationships, and that includes family and friendship, violence, fate or destiny, the younger and the older generations. So if I've got a series of quotations tracking Romeo and Juliet as characters throughout the play, and things that I know I'd say about those quotations, I'm probably really as safe as I can be. I'd have to adapt it to fit whatever the question was about, or whoever the question was about. But I know I'd have things that would pretty much always be relevant. Now, obviously, every teacher, every student's going to have their own favourite quotations, and there isn't a right answer, really, to which ones you focus on. For me, this would be my basic Romeo essay. So I'd start with the idea that before the play even begins, he's a character destined to fall in love, and a character who has no control over the negative outcome. And I'd focus, I think, on a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life from the prologue. For my second paragraph, I do something along the lines of, when we first meet Romeo, he is depressed and he's isolated. And my quotation might be, locks fair daylight out and makes himself an artificial night, from Montague in Act 1, Scene 1. I might equally go for something like loves a smoke made with a fume of sighs. I might actually do both of those. They both work. My third one would be that Romeo's life is transformed by falling in love with Juliet, and at that point he focuses everything on her. And the natural quotation is something like, it's the east and Juliet's the sun, from Act 2, Scene 2. Although I could go for something from Act 2, Scene 6, like love devouring death, do what he dare, it's enough I may but call her mine. For my fourth one, Romeo's forced to question that relationship when there are negative consequences to his choices, especially in terms of what happens to his friends. So something like, "O sweet Juliet, thy beauty hath made me effeminate," from Act 3, Scene 1. Or, equally, something like, "Fire-eyed fury be my conduct now." For my fifth one, something like that Romeo is forced to realise that while he may struggle against it, he can't control his own fate. So something like, "I am fortune's fool," from Act 3, Scene 1, or even "I defy you, stars," in Act 5, Scene 1, with stars being the symbol of fate. Now, ultimately, for my final paragraph, I go for the end of the text, that ultimately Romeo realises that the only release is seeking peace through death. And the quotation I'd use would be, "Here will I set up my everlasting rest and shake the yoke of inauspicious stars." And that's from Act 5, Scene 3. Now what that means is that my basic line of discussion, as a summary version, would be that before the play even begins, Romeo is a character who is destined to fall in love and who has no control over the negative outcome. When we first meet Romeo, he's depressed, he's isolated because of his unrequited love and because of the infatuation he feels for Rosaline. Now Romeo's life is, however, transformed by falling in love with Juliet, and he at that point focuses everything on her. However, he's forced to question that relationship when there are negative consequences as a result of his choices, especially for his friends. The Romeo is forced then to realise that while he may struggle against it, he can't control his own fate. And ultimately, he has to realise that the only release is through seeking peace in death. Now, obviously, there are literally hundreds of other quotations either from or about Romeo that I could use, but those ones I think would be the spine of my discussion, and I'd link in some others as I went, maybe. Now this works as a structure because it covers the whole play from the start to the end. It links to some of the big ideas, and it also connects with some of the other key characters. Now, what we're going to do on the next slide is take the first of those quotations and run through what I'd say about it as a bit of a model. My point for the beginning would obviously be that Romeo is a character who is destined to fall in love and who has no control over the potentially negative outcomes. And my quotation is, "A pair of star-crossed lovers take their life," from the prologue. Now, what it shows is that Romeo is both destined to meet Juliet, so their paths will cross, but also that fate is against them, it's crossing them. And I talk about the symbol of the stars as representing fate, as representing destiny, and possibly even representing religion as well. I think I'd zoom in on the verb take, maybe also the pronoun there, and even the noun life. Because what it suggests is that their suicide is a way of taking control, taking ownership, and that their love, their connection is so well matched that they have a single life rather than two lives. And I might make a reference to marriage and the joining together of man and wife into one flesh, something like that. I make a link to later in the play, I think when Romeo decides to defy you stars in Act 5, Scene 1. And then also, I think, are thrown reference to Act 5, Scene 3, and shake the yoke of inauspicious stars. So Romeo in those is someone who's trying to fight against his fate, but it's out of his hands, and it's determined, it's predetermined before the play, before it even begins, both because of the prologue and because of the families and their violence. So Romeo is essentially paralleling destiny, that our lives are dictated by higher forces, and the way that individuals are at the mercy of society and their wider context. So the way that, for example, young people's lives are controlled by social currents beyond their control, things like family, friendships, and so on. Now, for me, that would be something along the lines of the first paragraph of an essay that I'd write centered on Romeo. Obviously, it would depend on the question, and it would also depend on where the extract came from. Now, obviously, the play isn't called Romeo, it's called Romeo and Juliet. So I also need, I think, a way of tracking Juliet as a character. So this is what this would look like, perhaps. So before the play even begins, Juliet's a character who's destined to fall in love and with no control over the negative outcome of Peristocra's love. Now that is the same as the Romeo start. I can use it for both of them. Now, my second one would be that when we first meet Juliet, she's innocent, she's inexperienced, and she's controlled by the adults in her life. So my quotation could be, "My child's yet a stranger in the world." I might also go for, "Let two more summers wither in their pride, if we may think her ripe to be a bride." And those are from Lord Capulet in Act 1, Scene 2. I might even go for, "It's an honour that I dream not of," Juliet in Act 1, Scene 3. Now, my third one would be that Juliet's life is transformed by falling in love with Romeo, which is a similar point to the one I'd make for the Romeo essay. And I'd also talk about the fact that she is willing to sacrifice everything for him. So my quotations could be, "My only love sprung from my only hate, too early seen unknown, and unknown too late," from Act 1, Scene 5. Better one, I think, really, and probably the one I'd really talk about, "Be but sworn my love, and I'll no longer be a Capulet," and that's Act 2, Scene 2. My fourth one might well be then that she's forced to question that relationship when there are negative consequences as a result of her choices, especially for her family. So I could go for, "O serpent heart hid with a flaring face," from Act 3, Scene 2. I could go for, "Shall I speak ill of him that is my husband," again from Act 3, Scene 2. Now, by my fifth one, I might go for something along the lines of the fact that Juliet is forced into an impossible situation with her family, and she's also abandoned and isolated by everyone she trusts. And quotations, for example, such as, "And you be mine, I give you to my friend, and you be not, hang, beg, starve, die in the streets." That's Capulet in Act 3, Scene 5. I might go for something like, "If all else fail, myself have power to die," again from Act 3, Scene 5, and Juliet says that. Now, my last paragraph would again be for the end of the play. So something along the lines of the idea that in order to remain faithful to Romeo, Juliet's forced to take really dramatic, drastic measures, including, ultimately, taking her own life. So I could go for the quotation, "To live an unstained wife to my sweet love," from Act 4, Scene 1, or something like, "O happy dagger," from Act 5, Scene 3. Now what that means is that my basic discussion for Juliet, if I summarise it, would be something along these lines. So before the play even begins, Juliet is a character who is destined to fall in love and also who has no control over the negative outcome. When we first meet Juliet, she is innocent, she's naive, she's inexperienced, and she's controlled by the adults in her life. Juliet's life is, however, transformed by falling in love with Romeo, and she's willing to sacrifice everything for him. However, she's forced to question that relationship when there are negative consequences to her choices, especially for her family. Now, Juliet is then forced into an impossible situation with her family, and she's abandoned and isolated by everybody that she trusts. In order to remain faithful to Romeo and to their relationship, she's then forced to take dramatic measures, including, ultimately, taking her own life. Now again, there are literally hundreds of other quotations from or about Juliet that you could use. Those ones would be the spine of an essay that I would write, although I'd link in some other quotations as I went, perhaps. Again, one reason it works is because it covers the entire play from the start to the end. It also links in some of the key ideas and themes, and it makes connections to other characters. Now, to take one quotation, just that first one, and run it through, and this is going to start off by seeming very, very similar and very familiar. So my first point would be, for my Juliet essay, that she's a character who is destined to fall in love and with no control over the potentially negative outcomes. And my quotation is, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life, from the prologue. So it's the same, essentially, as the beginning of my Romeo essay. Now what this shows is that Juliet is both destined to meet Romeo, their paths will cross, and that fate is against them. It's crossed against them. And I talk again about the symbol of the stars as representing fate, destiny, possibly religion. I'll zoom in on the verb take, the pronoun there, and the noun life, because it suggests that suicide is a way of taking control, that they're so well matched in terms of their love that they have a single life rather than lives, they're married, etc. Now, up till that point, it's kind of the same as I do for Romeo. Where it becomes different, I think, is when I'm talking about this linking bit. Now, what I think I'd connect this to is the idea of Juliet's lack of control in her life, that she's obedient to her father at the start. No more deep lie and dark mine eye than your consent gives strength to make it fly, she says in Act 1, Scene 2. She's well aware that it's her father's views that she kind of needs to obey, even though he does appear to give her choice. Juliet really is seen by most people in the play as an object. She's linked to these gold clasps that will enclose Paris's story in Act 1, Scene 3, just a thing of value, but an object nonetheless. Even Romeo compares her to being an object in Act 1, Scene 5, talking about her as being a rich jewel, something precious, but an object. But it's Lord Capulet's view in Act 3, Scene 5, that he can give you to my friend, that shows that most clearly, I think. As a young woman, Juliet is trapped by society, by family, and by social expectation, and her only freedom is, ultimately, the death that has been predicted from the beginning. Now again, that for me would be then my first paragraph of an essay that I could write centred on Juliet, but it would depend on the question, and it would also depend on the extract and where the extract came from. In terms then of how we'd apply that to an essay question. Now I can see from the top of this question that the extract is from Act 2, Scene 2, and it tells me that Romeo has seen Juliet at her window. Easy, and it's a great scene, it's a very useful scene. Now looking at the question at the bottom of the extract, I can see that I'm being asked to write about the theme of romantic love. And since both Romeo and Juliet are in the extract and involved in romantic love, I think I'd talk about both of them. Having said that, I think Romeo gets some of the better lines here, so I'm probably going to lean the essay more on Romeo, with a few references to Juliet built in as well. Now, if I needed a comparison or a contrast, I might go for someone with a less idealised view of love, someone who's a bit more practical, like Mercutio or the nurse. Now, I need 2 to 3 quotations from the extract for me to talk about. Now, again, you often find there's something useful at the beginning of the extract and something useful at the end of the extract. It's been chosen to start and end there for a reason. And then I just need to pick something possibly from the middle. So I could talk about, at the start of it, Romeo offering to be new baptized, so that henceforth I never will be Romeo. I could then go for Romeo repeatedly calling Juliet dear saint and fair saint, and then possibly Romeo's comment at the end of it that stony limits cannot hold love out. Now, thinking about the essay structures on Romeo and Juliet that I've got mapped out already, I'll probably mix some of the paragraphs from each of them in terms of first impressions, then slot in the extract, the Act 2 Scene 2 bit, and then I might use my last few paragraphs and again mix and match a little bit from Romeo and Juliet. So something along the lines of the first paragraph about when we first meet Romeo, that he's depressed and isolated, looks for daylight out, artificial night, possibly love is a smoke. My second one might then be Juliet. So whereas when we first meet Juliet, she's innocent and inexperienced and controlled by the adults in her life. So my child is a stranger in the world, 2 more summers, and on I dream not of. That bit. Then I go for the extract. So the idea that both of their lives are transformed through their first meeting, and each is willing to sacrifice everything to be together. So from the extract, I'm going to go for call me but love, and I'll be new baptized, henceforth I never will be Romeo. So Romeo giving up everything, his family, his identity, all of it, to be with Juliet. And I could link that usefully to Juliet's line before this extract, I'll no longer be a Capulet. I'm then going to talk, I think, about the idea that Romeo, for my fourth paragraph in particular, seems like he almost instantly worships Juliet. So dear saint and fair saint. And then I could maybe link in the idea of Juliet being the son and the important significance in his life. That's quite useful. And again, that's an Act 2 Scene 2 reference. I then need to go for the middle of the play, really. So I would talk about the idea that both of the lovers are forced to question their relationship when there are negative consequences to their choices, particularly for friends and family. I can do Sweet Juliet, thy beauty hath made me effeminate, for Romeo, Act 3 Scene 1, and Serpent heart hid with a flowering face, for Juliet in Act 3 Scene 2. Now, at this point, I've got to talk about the end of the play, because I've been running out of time really here. So the idea that both of them are forced to take dramatic measures to be together, including ultimately taking their own lives. And then I can have Set Up My Everlasting Rest and Inauspicious Stars, and for Juliet, Oh Happy Dagger, both from Act 5, Scene 3. Now, for a different extract, I might have just used 3 quotations from the extract and kept 3 from my original plan. It depends, really. Now, obviously, whatever I choose from the extract, I'll still need to talk about features, zoom in on words, make links, make connections, and so on. And obviously, whatever I keep from my original essay, from my plan in advance, I need to make sure I nudge it, I make it fit, I make it work with the question. To summarise top tips then, so first of all, answer the right question. Yeah, find the right text, answer on that text, do that. Secondly, spend 55 minutes on your response, or about an hour and 10 minutes if you have extra time. Third one, have points and quotations ready for Romeo and Juliet as characters. Fourthly, read the question carefully. Look for where the extract is from, look at what's happening, and what's the focus you're being asked to talk about. For a fifth point, choose 2 to 3 quotations from the extract, and remember there's usually something useful at the start and at the end of it, and then 2 to 3 from the whole text. And lastly, write your essay chronologically, build in the extract wherever it fits. It just kind of works as an approach. If you are aiming higher, as ever, first bit of advice is to focus on the depth and the range. Again, analysis is important, it is, but as ever, you're not necessarily marked higher for discussions about obscure technical terms. So don't assume that because it sounds clever as a feature that it's therefore worth higher marks, because that doesn't really fit. So things like catachresis, anaphora, it's the effect and the impact that's important. Showing you have an understanding of how the whole play slots together is always useful, so making links and connections as you go. Do consider multiple layers of meaning. So if we take, for example, Juliet is the sun. So does that mean that she lights up the earlier darkness of Romeo's life? Is she a source of illumination and guidance? From a modern perspective, does that mean that she is now the centre of his life, the source of heat and life? Is this also a potential danger in terms of being burned by something, and that idea of the cycle of the sun from birth to death, from dawn to dusk? Is there maybe an almost pagan aspect where Romeo is worshipping her. It's like a form of idolatry. In terms of the juxtaposition of the sun with the moon and the idea of heat, is this about Romeo physically desiring her rather than something more spiritual, and so on. That idea of, I think, multiple layers. Are there other ways of looking at this thing? Do try to give your essay cohesion. Emphasize how your points follow on from each other and how you cover the entire text. And as a final point on this bit, remember, context can be useful, but thematic discussions are focused on ideas. That's far more likely to gain you higher marks rather than some obscure details about, I don't know, the significance of different kinds of fruit in Elizabethan England or something along those lines. As ever, thank you very much for your time today. Hopefully that's been useful. Don't forget that there are a whole range of videos covering everything about language and literature available through the Net YouTube channel, and take care.